Welcome to the latest chapter in my Prom Night review series. This is Prom Night 4, Deliver Us from Evil. And as is traditional with these films, there is a divergence in terms of continuity. This has very little to do with the previous three. So Gone is the Mary Lou villain from the second and the third films. I really liked Mary Lou, especially the iteration from the third film. Gone also is the camp comic sort of tone of the third movie. This is a much more serious slasher. It's got a brand new villain. It does have a little bit of connective tissue in that the first two kills here take place at Hamilton High, which is the same school from the first three films, and on a prom night, but that's it. I mean, once we get past the first 10 minutes here, it doesn't really feel like a prom night film anymore. So I have to ask the question, does this take place in the same universe at least as the first three? I guess it can't take place in the same universe as the first film because there is a sneaky reference to Jamie Lee Curtis as an actress halfway through this. It's sort of like a little Easter egg that's thrown in there. It could theoretically take place in the same universe as the Mary Lou ones, but I suspect it's just been intended as a reboot, and them using Hamilton High is just their way of saying, yeah, it's still sort of a prom night film, but a completely different timeline, completely different universe. So the brand new killer here is a priest, and he takes umbrage with the world's youngsters having sex. He doesn't like that at all. So at the start of this film, he goes to the car park of Hamilton High and kills a couple of kids who are having sex on the back seat on their prom night. I'm not sure how this priest knew that they would be doing this. How did he know to even go there unless this car park is some kind of renowned hotspot for kids having sex? I don't know. Strangely, after the event, the priest's colleagues at his local church or whatever, they realise it's him who did the murders and they lock him away in some kind of underground priest's dungeon. I don't know where this place is meant to be. So they solve the murders, but the police don't. It's a bit weird. If they want to protect society from this priest, why don't they just give him to the real police and then presumably he'll go to prison for life for killing two young teenagers in the back of a car in a really brutal way, unless they just want to protect the reputation of the church by not having this priest killer in all the newspapers, etc., etc. But it's a risky move because if the police stumble across the priest dungeon, then all these guys will go to prison for kidnapping, etc., etc. Anyway, stranger is to follow because those two original kills take place in 1957. The priest doesn't escape until 1991, so he spends 34 years in captivity and he doesn't age physically in all that time. So it's sort of implied that he's possessed by the devil or something, that there's something evil about him in a Michael Myers type of way where he doesn't entirely have the body of a proper human being. But eventually, the custodians of this priest dungeon pass on to somebody else who's a bit more lax and enables the evil priest to escape. And I don't know why, but he then goes to a specific house. I think there is a reason for it in the film. I've just forgotten what it is. It's a few nights since I watched it. At this house just happen to be two very young couples in the sort of 19 to 21 age range who have gone there basically for the night or the weekend just to have sex. So this is right in this priest's wheelhouse. He's going to get angry about this and want to kill these guys, and that is basically the main setup for the movie. Now, it was directed by a guy called, I forget his name, Clay Borris. He only directed one other movie apart from this, which was a low-budget action film in the 80s. So this was his last movie, though he did a lot of TV work either side of this. Maybe he just preferred TV work, or maybe he just couldn't get another movie gig after Prom Night 4. It's not that this film is terrible. I'm going to throw that out there at the front end of the review. I don't know the circumstances as to why this was his last film. Acting-wise, you probably won't recognise anybody in the cast, although they are pretty decent actors from what I can tell. I did realise after watching this, though, that the girl who plays the main final girl, who is called Nicole Boer in real life, she went on to play the maths geek in the sci-fi / horror film Cube, which has always been a favourite of mine. totally didn't recognise her at the time I was watching the movie. This was a few years early, but I've always loved Cube. It's a really great film. Going back to the priest, he seems far more maniacal in the 1957 segment than he does after he wakes up in 1991. It's almost as if his time in captivity, even though it hasn't aged his body, it has at least enabled him to calm his mind down a little bit. I'm probably overthinking that. I don't really like the look of him with the ponytail, and he looks far too young to be a priest anyway. He looks like he belongs in some kind of late 80s Steven Seagal movie. And I don't really understand his rules of engagement. Obviously, he likes to kill people who have sex or are thinking about sex, but does that extend to other sins? I mean, if he'd have come across those people in the beginning of the movie and they were sat in the car drinking whiskey instead of having sex, would he have killed them for that? What if he'd have come across them and they'd have been sat in the car just reading the Bible and not committing any sins at all? Would he have left them alone? Or would he have killed them under the pretense of, okay, well, you're reading the Bible today, but tomorrow you'll probably be screwing like bunnies because that's what all kids are like. It would have been interesting to find out, but we don't. There's a scene later on where one of the girls, for a joke, decides to try it on with her best female friend. Now, let me just say, it would have been funny if this female friend had responded by actually giving that love back because she'd secretly been a lesbian. She doesn't do that. But it crossed my mind that if the priest had seen this joke going on through the window or something, I think he might just have self-combusted with rage and we wouldn't have had a rest of the movie to watch. Speaking of those two girls, they are the two main sort of female protagonists in the film, and there are a lot of cliched characters in this. You've got the virgin girl who's the main final girl, although she is very much interested in having sex. It's sort of implied that this weekend where the film is taking place, it's going to be her first time and she's really gearing up for that. And then you've got this other girl, Laura, who is more the slutty one who's got all the experience. She sort of reminds me of the Tatum character from Scream, I guess. The two guys, your typical jocks, but they did confuse me a little bit in this because they look very similar. Their personalities are very similar. I had trouble telling them apart at various stages of the movie, and I was often confused a little bit about which one of them was with which girl sometimes. It's almost as if the casting director was female and she put out a call for some tall, dark, handsome guy to be in the film, ended up with two that she really liked, and then thought, oh, I can't get rid of any, let's just put them both in there, something like that. There is a fifth character in the main plotline at the house who's literally a fifth wheel. He's the younger brother of one of the guys whose parents own the house, I think. When I say younger, I mean sort of 15, 16. He is at least interested in sex, even if he doesn't have a girlfriend yet. And the running joke is that he's trying to steal a glimpse of the other characters doing it. So he's peeking around a doorway at one point, watching them making out on the couch, and then later on he's looking through the window when Laura and her boyfriend are having sex. But easily the best bit of comic relief in the film that belongs to Laura earlier on, because she goes to this kind of religious school and she ends up in the nun's office, and this the headmistress's office, but who's also a nun, and this nun says something to her like, you were in the back of that car with that boy, I know what you were doing, you were and Laura just goes, we were fucking, yes. And this nun's like, oh, it's the sort of joke that would have really belonged in Prom Night 3, but it's still pretty good here. So what's the stalking and the slashing like? It's reasonable. I suppose there's a good semblance of atmosphere because the characters use candles rather than light bulbs most of the time. There's a good moment where the two guys go down into the cellar and they find some wine bottles, and almost as an afterthought they decide to take some up into the main part of the house. It's almost like, well, I guess we need something to do between sex sessions. The kills are okay. There's one particularly good one where this guy's sliding down some roof tiles, but the best kill of all actually is reserved for the finale. I was really impressed with the final confrontation between the main heroine and the priest. There's no cheesy freeze frame moment where the final girl says something like, you're excommunicated, fucker. So I hate it when they do things like that. The only other negative about this film that I would add before I wrap up is that the stuff at the priest dungeon in the first half of the film does take a bit long. You know, the film isn't paced very well until we get to all the stuff that happens at the main house. But on the whole, this is not a bad slasher. I think it would be a very good entry-level horror film for sort of young teens. You know, you've got a bit of nudity in there. There's some kills, but they're not that bloodthirsty. I think I would have been a little bit creeped out by this if I'd have watched it sort of back when I was 13, 14, just randomly catching films on the TV. It didn't affect me much these days, but it was certainly interesting to watch it. Going forward, I don't think it's something that I would rewatch necessarily unless it came out as part of a big Prom Night box set that had been remastered and stuff, because one thing I've noticed throughout all these Prom Night films is they're not very good prints. I mean, number 3 I had to watch on my mobile phone, and this one, it was a little bit blurry and old looking. I came to this having watched The Fast and the Furious on Ultra HD the night before, so as you can imagine, that was a hell of a come down. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give for Prom Night 4 Deliver Us from Evil. We've got 1, 2, 2.5 bloody axes out of 5. That's my average score. Not bad, not particularly great. I will add that this score is for, you know, people who enjoy slasher films. If slashers are not your favourite type of horror, then maybe just take another half an axe off. Right, I'll be back with another review very soon. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.